close your eyes and imagine you're standing outside a medieval tavern. Let's raise a glass with Milo and celebrate our first experience here. Tonight, I want to take you slowly and gently into a different world, into a town of timber and stone, of dim windows and narrow lanes, of smoke rising into the evening air, and of warm firelight waiting behind a well-worn door. I want to take you to a medieval tavern, not the bright and polished tavern of modern fantasy, but the real place, the ordinary place, the human place, where travelers ended their journeys, where townspeople gathered after long days of labor, and where food, drink, rumor, and companionship came together beneath darkened rafters. As you listen, there is no need to hurry, and no need to remember every detail. You do not have to keep track of dates or names or exact places. You only need to let the scene come to you, little by little, as though you were walking there yourself, at the quiet end of the day, when the light is fading and the town is settling into evening. Imagine, then, that the sun has already lowered beyond the fields and beyond the distant tree line, and that the last of its light lingers only faintly in the sky. The day has not long ended. The labor of the market, the workshop, the stable, and the street has begun to soften into night. Smoke hangs above the rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a fire is being stirred. Somewhere else, a shutter is being closed against the chill. The air is cool enough to notice on your face, and the earth beneath your feet still holds the memory of many footsteps. We are not beginning inside the tavern, because no one in the medieval world would truly experience it that way. A tavern was part of a larger life, part of a town, part of a road, part of the rhythm of movement and rest. To understand what it was like to visit one, we must first approach it. We must come to it the way a traveler would, or a local worker returning at the end of the day, or a merchant pausing before supper, or a weary stranger seeking warmth, noise, and the reassurance of other human beings close by. That is one of the most important things to remember about the medieval tavern. It was not simply a place to drink. It was a place to arrive, a place to pause, a place to hear and be heard, a place where people came carrying the dust of the road on their boots, the cold in their hands, and the concerns of the day still fresh in their minds. It could be rough and crowded and smoky and far from comfortable by modern standards. But it was also alive in a way that is easy to forget now. It gathered together hunger, fatigue, companionship, business, laughter, caution, storytelling, and the simple need to be indoors while darkness settled outside. And so, as we begin, let the modern world drift back for a while. Leave behind electric light, printed menus, polished glass, and the quiet hum of climate control. Leave behind the idea of neat separation between public and private, between business and leisure, between eating, drinking, resting, and learning the news of the day. In the medieval town, these things often met under the same roof, and that roof, on this evening, is the tavern toward which we are now walking. There is something deeply human in that walk. Even now, across so many centuries, it is easy to understand the feeling. The day is ending. The air is cooling. The body wants warmth. The mind wants rest. The feet want stillness. And ahead, somewhere in the gathering dusk, there is a doorway where light spills out into the street, where voices can be heard before faces are seen, and where the promise of a bench, a cup, and a meal seems brighter than almost anything else. So let us go there slowly. Let us walk through the evening streets of a medieval town. Let us listen before we enter. Let us notice the mud beneath our feet, the smell of smoke in the air, the shape of the houses leaning close together, and the sound of life continuing after sunset. And then, when the moment is right, we will step across the threshold and see what it was really like to visit a medieval tavern. The street is narrower than a modern road, and darker too, though not yet fully black with night. The last light of evening rests faintly above the town, enough to outline the roofs and chimney tops, enough to catch the edges of timber beams and uneven walls, but not enough to brighten the ground in front of you. You walk carefully, because the earth beneath your feet is not smooth. It is worn, rutted, damp in places, churned by wheels, boots, hooves, and rain. In some seasons, it would be thick with mud. In others, packed hard and dusty. Tonight, perhaps, it is a little slick in the hollows and rough along the edges, marked by the passing of many people before you. The houses lean inward as if closing around the lane. Their upper stories, where they jut out over the lower walls, make the street feel tighter still. Here and there, a small window glows with candlelight or firelight from within. The light is soft and yellow, never bright, and it falls only a short distance before being swallowed by evening. A shutter closes somewhere above. A voice calls from inside, one home to another room beyond. A child cries briefly, then quiets. The ordinary life of the town is retreating indoors. You move slowly, and there is much to notice. Smoke hangs everywhere, not in a thick cloud, but in a lingering veil that belongs to any place where hearth fires burn in every house. It carries the smell of wood, peat in some regions, cooking pots, damp ash, and the faint bitterness of things charred over open flame. Mixed into it are the smells of animals, leather, wet straw, and old timber. Somewhere close by there may be a stable, or a cart left standing, or a narrow yard where refuse has been thrown. Medieval towns were intimate places in every sense. The smells of work, food, fuel, animals, and people all pressed together. And yet, for all that, the evening has a kind of softness to it. The market noise has faded. The sharp energy of midday buying and selling is over. What remains is the slower music of the town settling down. A cart creaks in the distance. A horse snorts. Boots strike the earth with dull sounds. Somewhere farther off, a dog barks once, then again, then stops. You may hear the faint ringing of a bell from a church tower, marking the hour in a voice that carries above roofs and lanes and slowly thins into the dark. This is the world in which a tavern stands, not alone, not as a stage set, but as part of this network of houses, workshops, storerooms, alleys, courtyards, and muddy passages. By day, these streets would have been fuller still, with apprentices running errands, traders unloading wares, women carrying baskets, animals being driven, and laborers moving between jobs. By evening, the pace changes. People are still out, but with purpose. They are heading home, or finishing the last task, or seeking supper, drink, company, or shelter. As you continue along the lane, you begin to sense that one building ahead is different from the others. Not grander, not necessarily larger, but more awake. A little more light shows at the front. The door opens and closes more often. A shape passes across the window. There is sound there that does not belong to a single household. A rise of voices together, then a burst of laughter, then the muffled thump of something set heavily down. Even before you clearly see the place, you know that people are gathered there. And this matters. In a world without street lamps shining in regular rows, without glowing shop fronts, without the bright glass of modern businesses announcing themselves to passers-by, the signs of life were subtler and more precious. Light in a window, a warm noise, movement at a doorway. These things drew the eye and the body. They suggested welcome, or at least activity, and for a weary traveler or a local man finished with his work, that was often enough. As you come nearer, the lane underfoot tells its own story. Near busier doorways, the ground is more worn. The threshold stones are smoother, the mud more churned. Perhaps there are marks left by the rims of barrels or the hooves of animals tied nearby. Perhaps the wall beside the entrance has been brushed 1,000 times by passing shoulders, baskets, cloaks, and rough hands. A medieval tavern was a place of constant use, and its exterior bore that use plainly, in wood polished by touch, in earth deepened by traffic, in the weathered look of things handled every day. For now, though, we are still outside. We are still in the coolness of evening, breathing the smoke-scented air of the town and listening as one layer of sound gives way to another. The tavern is close, but not yet before us in full. We are approaching it as people did then, gradually, from darkness toward warmth, from the open street toward the crowded room, from the work of the day toward the uncertain comfort of the night. And as we walk, it is worth remembering that this approach would feel different depending on who you were. A townsman might know the place well, know the keeper, know which bench his companions preferred, know whether the ale was good tonight or poor. A merchant from another district might approach with sharper attention, measuring the quality of the establishment before entering, wondering whether he would find decent wine, reliable company, or useful news. A laborer with few coins might hope for little more than a cup and a place near the fire. A traveler might feel relief simply at hearing voices inside, because voices meant shelter, witnesses, and some chance of safety until morning. All these lives met at the tavern door, and now, ahead of us, one more detail emerges from the dimness. Above the entrance, moving slightly in the evening air, there hangs a sign. The sign hangs out over the lane from an iron bracket or a stout beam, catching what little light still remains in the sky and what firelight escapes from the building below. It does not need to be elegant to do its work. In a world where many people read imperfectly or not at all, an image could speak more clearly than words. A painted cup, a cluster of grapes, a boar, a crown, a saint, a ship, or some other familiar emblem might mark the place. The paint may be fading. The wood may be cracked by rain and winter air. Yet even in poor condition, it tells you what matters most. This is a place meant to be found. There is something reassuring in that sign. It is not simply an advertisement in the modern sense. It is a promise of recognition, a marker in the dim street. A way for regulars to say, yes, this is the place, and for strangers to know that they have reached a house where food or drink or shelter may be had if they can pay for it. The sign swings just enough to creak softly now and then. Beneath it, the doorway stands open for a moment, then closes again, then opens once more as someone goes in or comes out. Now that you are close, the exterior reveals its own quiet details. The timbers around the door are worn smooth in places where hands have pushed and shoulders have brushed. The threshold stone, or the lower wooden sill, has been crossed by countless boots. The wall beside the entrance may be marked by damp rising from the ground, by soot from nearby lamps or torches, or by the simple weathering that comes from years of smoke, rain, and touch. Nothing about it is neat in the modern sense, but everything shows use, and in that use there is a kind of honesty. Near the doorway, there may be a bench, or a barrel set against the wall, or a place where deliveries are left before being rolled inside. If the tavern serves travelers of some means, there may be a yard nearby or a stable close at hand where horses can be seen to. If it is a smaller house more for locals than for overnight guests, the exterior may still show signs of constant trade. Empty casks, stacked firewood, baskets, or the damp patch where slops have been thrown out onto the lane. A tavern was not sealed off from the street. It breathed into it. Its smells, its sounds, and its people crossed that boundary constantly. You can hear that now more clearly than before. From inside come several layers of sound at once, muffled by walls but still distinct enough to stir the imagination. A low spread of voices. A laugh rising suddenly above the rest. The scrape of a bench. The clink or knock of cups against wood. Somewhere deeper in the room, perhaps, the dull sound of a barrel being moved, or a pot lid set back into place, or a servant stepping quickly across the floor. These are not theatrical sounds. They are ordinary, practical, repetitive, but together they form the unmistakable noise of a place where many people are awake under one roof. And there is light, not a blaze, but enough. It slips through the cracks around the shutters and through the opening of the door when someone passes, and in those moments you glimpse warmth as much as brightness. Firelight inside a medieval building had a living quality. It shifted. It trembled. It brightened one face and left another in shadow. Even from outside, you can sense that movement, that pulse, and it stands in quiet contrast to the cool stillness of the lane. This is the moment before entering, and it is worth lingering here. The tavern door is a threshold not only between outside and inside, but between kinds of experience. Out here, the air is cooler, the sounds thinner, the space more open even in a narrow street. Inside will be warmth, smoke, bodies, stronger smells, closer voices, and the immediate nearness of other lives. Out here, you can still choose how you enter, with confidence or caution, as a familiar guest or an observant stranger. Once you step in, the room will begin to define you more quickly. People will look up. They will notice your clothes, your bearing, whether you seem local, whether you carry money, whether you look tired, proud, lost, or wary. That is another truth of the tavern exterior. It served as a brief pause for judgment. A traveler might stop here to listen and decide whether the place sounded too rough, too crowded, too expensive, or just right. Someone low on coin might hesitate, wondering whether he could afford what the house offered. A person seeking company might gather courage before pushing the door open. A local might glance at who stands nearby and already know from posture or accent whether tonight would be a peaceful evening or a difficult one. The categories we use now, tavern, inn, alehouse, do help us think, but the medieval reality was often less tidy. One place might serve mostly drink to local people. Another might provide meals and beds as well. Another might be known for wine rather than ale, or for drawing merchants rather than laborers. Yet from the street, many of these distinctions would not be obvious at once. What you knew first was simpler. There was a house of gathering here, and it was alive. So stand for a moment beneath the sign and let the place settle in your mind. Notice the slight movement of it overhead. Notice the worn frame of the doorway. Notice the warmth that escapes each time the door opens, carrying with it smoke, ale, cooked food, and the breath of the room itself. Notice, too, the people near the entrance. Perhaps a man emerges tightening his cloak against the night, his face flushed by drink and firelight. Perhaps another ducks in, eager for supper, Perhaps someone lingers just outside to finish a word with a companion before disappearing indoors. All of this belongs to the life of the tavern before you ever cross the threshold. And now, having come through the lane and beneath the sign, having paused in the evening air and listened to the sound within, we are ready to do what every visitor had to do. We are ready to push open the door and step from the cooling street into the warm, smoky, crowded world inside. The change is immediate. One moment you are standing in the evening air, with the coolness of the lane on your face and the open dark above the roofs. And the next, you are inside, enclosed by timber, smoke, warmth, and sound. The door closes behind you, and with that small motion, the outside world seems to fall away almost completely. The street does not vanish, but it becomes distant at once, as though it belonged to another hour and another mood. The first thing you feel is the heat. Not an even heat, not the gentle balance of a modern room, but a living warmth shaped by the hearth, by candles, by bodies gathered close, by cooking pots, by damp cloaks drying near the fire, and by the breath of many people sharing one interior space. Near the doorway, the air is cooler for a moment, stirred each time someone enters or leaves, but a few steps farther in the warmth settles around you. It carries with it the sense that this place has been occupied for hours already, and will remain occupied long after full darkness has taken the street outside. Then comes the smell, stronger and more layered than it seemed from the threshold. Smoke lies over everything, not necessarily choking, but present in the rafters, in the beams, in the cloth, in the very grain of the wood. Beneath it are the smells of ale and wine, of spilled drink drying on tables, of stew or pottage still warm in a pot, of bread broken open by many hands, of damp wool steaming faintly, of leather belts and boots, of rushes or straw on the floor holding the memory of mud and use. It is not a clean smell, but it is a full one, a human one, a smell made from food, labor, fuel, and shelter, all pressed close together. At first, your eyes do not entirely understand the room. Firelight is unlike daylight. It does not reveal everything equally. It lifts one corner into visibility and leaves another in shadow. It flashes along the rim of a cup, catches on the side of a face, glows red along the edge of a bench, then trembles and shifts. Candles, if there are any, help only a little. The room is dim, and for the first few moments you see it not as a clear whole, but in fragments. A moving sleeve, the outline of a shoulder, the shine of a cask, the flare of the hearth, the pale oval of a face turned briefly toward the door. And faces do turn. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough for you to feel it. The opening of the door has let in cool air in a stranger's shape, or perhaps a familiar one, and in a place like this people notice. They glance up from their cups, their bowls, their talk. They register you quickly, your clothes, your posture, whether you seem uncertain, whether you belong here, whether you arrive alone or with purpose. In the medieval tavern, to enter a room was to be seen, but the attention passes almost at once unless you give reason for it to linger. The room resumes its own life. Conversation continues. A bench scrapes. Someone laughs. Someone closer to the fire coughs into the smoke. From deeper in the house comes the sound of a ladle against a pot or a jug set down on wood. The tavern does not stop for your arrival. It absorbs it. As your eyes adjust, the room begins to come together. You see where the strongest light is, and that is where the hearth stands or where the fire burns. You see the long tables, the benches set near them, the rough floor underfoot, the dark beams above. You begin to understand the shape of the place, not through neat lines, but through use. Here is where people sit. Here is where drink is carried. Here is where warmth gathers. Here is where traffic from door to table has worn its path. This is not a room arranged for display. It is arranged by habit. The doorway behind you is still there, but already it feels farther away than it is. The tavern has enclosed you not only physically, but socially. Outside, in the lane, you are one figure moving through darkness. Inside, you are part of a shared interior. You breathe the same smoke. You hear the same voices. You stand in the same shifting light. Whatever your rank or purpose, you have crossed into a common atmosphere. And there is something deeply ancient in that sensation, something that people across many centuries would recognize. The relief of a roof overhead, the promise of heat after chill, the reassurance of human presence. Even if the room is too loud, too smoky, too crowded, even if the ale is poor and the benches hard, the body still understands what it means to come in from outside. The medieval tavern, for all its roughness, offered that most basic of comforts, enclosure against the dark. It is worth lingering in this first moment, because it is so different from the way we often imagine the past. We tend to picture medieval interiors as fully visible, as if lit for a stage or a painting. But the real experience was slower. Rooms emerged. Details revealed themselves in degrees. What you knew first was not decoration, but sensation, warmth, smell, sound, the nearness of other people, the low ceiling after the open sky, the way firelight moved across wood and cloth, the way the air itself seemed thicker indoors, full of smoke and breath, and the work of the day settling into evening. Now, as your vision steadies, the tavern begins to take clearer form before you. The fire draws the eye. The tables stretch beyond it. The benches are occupied. The floor is uneven and strewn. The beams overhead are darkened by years of smoke. Somewhere a servant or keeper moves with practiced ease through spaces that still seem dim to you. The room is revealing itself little by little, and with it, the true interior life of the medieval tavern. So remain where you are for just a breath longer, standing just inside the door, as the warmth gathers around you and the room comes gradually into view. Then, slowly, let your eyes travel toward the hearth, the tables, the benches, and the objects that fill this working, crowded place. Now the room begins to resolve itself, and what first seemed only warmth and shadow takes on shape and order. Not a neat order, not the measured symmetry of a modern dining room, but the kind of order that grows from repeated use. Everything here is where it needs to be, because people have needed it there again and again, day after day, season after season. The tavern is not arranged to impress. It is arranged to function. Your eye goes first, almost inevitably, to the hearth. Fire is the center of the room's life, whether it burns in a large open fireplace at one wall or in a hearth space that commands the main chamber. Its light moves across the faces nearest to it. Its heat draws people inward. Its smoke rises and spreads, leaving the rafters above dark and stained from years of soot. Near the fire, the air is warmer, softer, and thick with the scent of burning wood, hot iron, and simmering food. The glow of it touches everything. It turns the edges of cups to amber, catches in the threads of rough wool, and makes the polished patches of old wood shine faintly. Close by the hearth stand the tables, long and practical, made of heavy boards set on trestles or sturdy frames. They are not dainty things. They are built to bear weight, to survive spills, to endure fists, elbows, knives, bowls, jugs, and the long pressure of daily use. Their surfaces show it plainly. They are nicked, stained, scrubbed, and worn smooth in places by countless hands. Along them run benches, equally plain, where people sit side by side, with little thought for personal space. A few stools may stand nearer the edges of the room, or beside a wall, or close to the place where food and drink are served, but the bench is the true furniture of company here. To sit at one is to sit with others, whether you know them or not. The floor beneath all this is rough underfoot. In some places, it may be packed earth. In others, timber boards. Often there are rushes or straw scattered across it, laid down to catch mud, spills, scraps, and the ordinary debris of a busy house. These rushes do not make the room clean in the modern sense. Instead, they absorb the life of the room, holding traces of drink, ash, dirt, and food until they are changed out. They soften the step a little. They muffle sound in places. They also remind you that this is a space where many things happen at once, and where cleanliness is a matter of effort and management, not constant freshness. Above, the beams and rafters seem almost to disappear into shadow. Smoke has darkened them over years, perhaps decades. If you look carefully, you may see bunches of herbs hanging to dry, or tools stored out of the way, or simply the blackened architecture of the place rising overhead. The ceiling is not high by modern standards. In some taverns, it may feel low enough to add to the sense of enclosure, making the room warmer, darker, and more intimate. The smoke gathers there, not always escaping as neatly as one might wish, so that the upper air seems to hold the memory of every fire that has burned below. Along the walls are practical things rather than decorations: pegs for cloaks and hats, shelves for cups, jugs, bowls, or small stores, casks standing ready or tucked into a service corner, perhaps a chest, perhaps a side table where bread is cut or bowls are filled, perhaps an iron hook, a ladle, a knife, a cloth. Nothing exists merely to be admired. Every object belongs to the daily operation of the place. Even the few things that may seem decorative, a painted sign indoors, a bit of carving, a bright cloth, would still be part of a working environment rather than separate from it. And there is movement everywhere, though not chaotic movement. The room has patterns. People come in through the door, pause, look, and find a place. Servants or household members move between hearth and table. Drink travels from cask to cup, from hand to hand. A keeper crosses the room with the confidence of someone who knows every loose board and narrow passage. Guests lean in to speak, shift to make room, turn to call for more drink, stretch their feet toward the fire, or draw back from a draught when the door opens. The tavern is busy, but it is busy in familiar ways. This is one of the most striking truths of the room, how communal it is. There is very little privacy here. The tables are shared. The benches place bodies close together. Voices carry easily. Light is common, heat is common, air is common. Even the floor bears the mark of everyone's arrival. If you visit a medieval tavern, you do not enter a private bubble of experience. You enter a collective one. You become part of a room in which many other lives are unfolding beside your own. That can feel comforting or uneasy, depending on who you are. For some, the nearness of others means safety, conversation, and belonging. For others, it means scrutiny, crowding, and caution. But either way, it shapes the entire experience. A tavern is not simply a place where one happens to drink. It is a place where one drinks in public, among the sounds, smells, habits, and judgments of the room. Look again toward the hearth, and then toward the tables beyond it. Notice how the fire gathers one cluster of people while shadow hides another. Notice how the benches create little worlds of conversation along their length. Notice the floor, marked by use and softened by rushes. Notice the beams overhead, carrying the smoke of years. Notice the casks, the cups, the pegs, the rough walls, the modest tools of hospitality and trade. All of these together form the true setting of the medieval tavern. Not grand, not polished, but durable, lived in, and entirely shaped by human need. And now that the room itself has come into focus, another layer begins to emerge more clearly than before. The people seated at these benches, standing near the fire, speaking across the tables, entering by the door, serving, waiting, watching. The tavern is not defined by furniture alone. It is defined by those who fill it. Now that your eyes have adjusted to the room, the people within it begin to stand out one by one, not as a crowd alone, but as many different lives brought together for a few hours under one roof. This is one of the most revealing things about the medieval tavern. It is never only a room with drink in it. It is a meeting place, a resting place, a place of transaction, observation, habit, and chance encounter. To sit here for any length of time is to see something of the social world beyond the door. At one bench there may be local workmen, men whose faces are familiar to one another, and perhaps to the keeper as well. Their clothes are plain, their hands marked by labor, their posture easier than that of strangers, because they know the room, the customs of the house, and perhaps the quality of tonight's ale before they taste it. They sit with the ordinary ease of people who belong to a place. Their talk may be of work finished or unfinished, of a tool broken, of wages, of weather, of a neighbor, of some small dispute from the market, of nothing important at all. The tavern receives this kind of talk as naturally as it receives spilled drink or smoke from the hearth. Not far from them may sit a merchant or trader, set apart not by a separate chamber perhaps, but by dress, by manner, by the better quality of cloth at the shoulder, by the pouch at the belt, by the attentive way others measure him. A prosperous guest often changes the mood around him, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The keeper may notice him sooner. A servant may come to him more quickly. Those nearby may listen more carefully if he speaks of roads, prices, or conditions in another town. He has money, perhaps information, perhaps goods, perhaps influence. In a medieval tavern, these things are visible before they are spoken aloud. Then there are the travelers whose presence can be felt almost at once. They carry the road with them. It is there in the dust or damp on their boots, in the weariness of their shoulders, in the cautious way they take in a room before settling. A carter, a messenger, a peddler, a pilgrim, a sailor come inland, a man accompanying a pack animal or wagon. Each brings something of the outside world into the tavern. Sometimes that something is news, sometimes it is only strangeness. Accent alone may draw attention. The cut of a cloak, the shape of a hat, the manner of crossing oneself, the way a man asks for drink, all these can mark him as from somewhere else. And that somewhere else matters deeply in a world where most knowledge travels by voice and by foot. A stranger is not merely unknown. He is a possible source. Has the bridge upriver held after the rain? Are the roads safe beyond the next market town? Has a lord died? Is a tax rumored? Are prices rising? Has fighting broken out somewhere distant or dangerously near? Such questions move through a tavern, the way warmth moves from the fire, unevenly perhaps, but with unmistakable force. The presence of a traveler changes what the room might learn before the night is over. There are younger men too, apprentices or servants, not yet settled into the weight and repetition of older labor. They may be louder, quicker to laugh, quicker too to risk foolishness. Their energy has a different quality from that of seasoned workers. Beside them may sit older regulars, men who have watched many evenings gather in this same room and who no longer need to prove anything by their noise. Such men often seem almost part of the furniture of the house itself. So naturally do they fit the bench, the cup, the fire-lit corner. They drink more slowly, perhaps. They speak when they have reason. They observe, and always there are gradations. Rank does not disappear at the tavern door. It enters with everyone else. You can often read it in the cloth, in the boots, in the condition of a belt, in the quality of a knife, in whether a man carries himself as one accustomed to being served or as one accustomed to waiting. Even where the benches are shared, there are places in the room that feel more desirable than others, near the fire, away from the draught, closer to the keeper's attention. A prosperous or respected guest may naturally find a better spot. A poorer one may accept the edge of the room, the cooler bench, the lesser ale, the later service. This does not mean the tavern is rigid in the way of a formal hall. Its very nature is more mixed than that. But it is mixed within the realities of medieval society, not outside them. People meet here across lines they may not cross in more private settings, yet they do not cease to notice those lines. A laborer knows a merchant is not his equal in means. A stranger knows when he is being judged. A man with coin can often purchase not only drink but better treatment, better patience, perhaps safer company. Public does not mean equal. It means visible. That visibility changes the experience of everyone in the room. To enter the tavern is to be looked at and placed, however roughly, in the minds of others. Are you local or foreign, comfortable or uncertain, worth speaking to or best left alone, likely to pay or likely to quarrel? These judgments may last only a moment, but they shape the social weather of the place. A regular settles into it without effort. A newcomer must feel his way. Yet for all this quiet measuring, there is also a real sense of shared condition. Most people here, whatever their rank, have come because the day is ending and the night requires certain things: food, drink, warmth, company, information, shelter, rest. The tavern gathers these needs together. The local mason, the passing carrier, the better-dressed trader, the apprentice with too much energy, the older man staring into the fire, all are here because the room offers what the dark street does not. This is why the medieval tavern feels so alive. Not because it is romantic, and not because it is free of tension, but because it draws together people who would otherwise remain in motion, at labor, or apart. It makes a temporary community out of hunger and tiredness and curiosity. Some guests come for habit, some for necessity, some for opportunity, some for simple human closeness at the end of a cold or tiring day. And as you watch them, another truth becomes clear. This room is not made only by the men seated at the tables. There are others here too, moving through the space, serving, brewing, managing, observing, and shaping the life of the tavern in ways that are easy to overlook if one imagines it only as a male drinking hall. The fuller story of the medieval tavern includes them as well. It is easy, from a distance of centuries, to imagine the medieval tavern as a place occupied entirely by men, a rough room of drink and noise in which women scarcely appeared, except perhaps as passing figures. But the reality was more complicated, and in many ways much more interesting. Women were part of tavern life in visible, practical, and often essential ways. They were not always centered in the records, and not always equally free to occupy such spaces as men were, but they were there, and the life of the tavern often depended on their labor. In many parts of medieval Europe, the work of brewing ale was closely connected to the household, and household work was very often women's work. Before drink became more consistently associated with larger commercial production, brewing could be done on a smaller scale, in domestic settings, as part of the practical rhythm of feeding and sustaining a family or earning income from surplus. A woman who brewed well might sell what she made or help support a household through that trade. In this sense, the world of drink was not entirely separate from the world of the home. The tavern, alehouse, and household economy could overlap more than we sometimes expect. That means that when you imagine a medieval tavern, you should not imagine women only at its edges. In some cases, a woman might be the keeper of the house, either as a wife sharing the work with her husband or, in widowhood or other circumstances, as the person chiefly responsible for the business herself. She might oversee the drink, the food, the servants, the accounts, the supplies, the condition of the house, and the conduct of the guests. She would know who paid reliably and who did not. She would know which regulars were merely noisy and which were trouble. She would know when the cask was running low, when the bread must be cut, when the fire needed tending, when strangers should be watched more carefully, and when the room had shifted from lively to dangerous. If you stand quietly in the tavern and look beyond the men seated at the benches, you can imagine such women moving through the room with practiced confidence. A serving woman carrying cups or bowls, a keeper speaking briefly with a guest, neither timid nor ornamental, but busy, direct, and attentive to the needs of the house. A woman near the hearth managing the food, judging by smell and sight when a pot is ready, when bread should be brought out, when more broth can be stretched, when something must be saved for later guests or for the household itself. The labor is constant, and much of it requires not only effort, but judgment. At the same time, women in tavern spaces were subject to the same social realities that shaped every part of medieval life. Public places were not neutral. Respectability mattered. Reputation mattered. A woman's presence in such a house might be read differently depending on her age, status, occupation, whether she was local, whether she worked there, whether she was accompanied, and what sort of establishment it was. The same room that could be ordinary and necessary as a place of labor might also be seen as morally suspect by those who distrusted drinking houses or the kinds of company they attracted. This is part of what makes the tavern such a revealing place in medieval society. It gathers together the formal and the informal, the respectable and the questionable, the domestic and the commercial. Women appear within all of those categories. Some are clearly part of the proper running of the household and business. Some are customers or companions. Some may be judged harshly simply for being present in a public drinking space at all. The tavern did not erase social expectations. It exposed them. There is also the matter of safety, which would have been understood by anyone living at the time, even if it was not always spoken of in gentle language. A crowded room where men drank, gambled, argued, and arrived from the road could be a place of opportunity, but also of risk. A woman working there needed practical authority, awareness, and resilience. A woman visiting might do so under conditions shaped by custom, caution, and local reputation. None of this means women were rare in tavern life. It means that their presence carried meanings that could shift depending on context, and that the roughness of the room affected them in specific ways. Yet it would be a mistake to reduce women in the tavern only to vulnerability or judgment. They could also possess skill, knowledge, and local standing. A woman known for good ale, fair dealing, or competent management might command real respect. Regular customers would know her standards. Suppliers would deal with her. Neighbors would rely on the stability of her house. In a world where much of life depended on reputation, built slowly over time, practical competence had weight, and a well-run tavern could not function on male drinking alone. It required management, memory, provision, and ceaseless work. So as you listen to the room and imagine its life, widen the picture. The medieval tavern is not only the bench and the cup, not only the laborer and the merchant, not only the laugh or the quarrel rising from the table. It is also the person who brewed, who served, who kept account, who watched the door, who stretched the meal, who gauged the mood of the room, and who helped turn a smoky interior into a place where people could eat, drink, and remain for the evening. And once we see that more fully, another part of the tavern becomes easier to understand as well. For all the voices and movement in the room, much of its life still centers on something simple and immediate: what is poured into the cup, what is set before the guest, and what it feels like to eat and drink here at the end of the day. Now, at last, your attention settles on the cup itself, because however many things the tavern may be at once, it is still a place where drink lies at the center of the evening. In the medieval world, that fact was both ordinary and important. People did not think of drink only as indulgence or celebration. It belonged to daily life, to nourishment, to hospitality, to labor, to custom, and to the shared rhythm of the table. To be handed a cup in a tavern was not a small detail. It was one of the most immediate ways in which the house received you. What fills that cup depends on where you are. In much of Northern Europe, ale is the expected drink, familiar and deeply woven into everyday life. In regions shaped by vineyards and long habits of wine production, wine may be more common, especially in houses known for serving it. Yet even these distinctions are never perfectly tidy. Medieval drinking culture was local, varied, and practical. What the tavern offers depends on region, season, supply, wealth, and the nature of the establishment itself. A traveler moving from one part of Europe to another might find that the ordinary drink of one town was a treat in another, and the familiar taste of home gave way to something new. If it is ale that is set before you, it may not resemble the clear, cold, standardized drink that many people imagine today. Medieval ale was often cloudier, fuller, less filtered, more alive with the traces of its making. It might carry yeastiness, grain, a touch of sourness, perhaps bitterness, perhaps the faint edge of herbs depending on local practice. It was a drink with body, a drink that sat in the belly as well as passing over the tongue. Some ale was weak enough for regular everyday use, while stronger drink certainly existed too. Quality varied greatly. One tavern might be known for good ale, another for thin or disappointing brew, and regulars would know the difference as surely as they knew the temperament of the keeper. The vessel matters too. The cup in your hand may be wood, leather, pottery, or pewter if the house is more prosperous or the guest more fortunate. Each material changes the sensation a little. A wooden cup feels warm and ordinary, shaped by use. Pottery may hold the drink with a sense of solidity and weight. Pewter suggests greater means, or at least a better appointed room. None of these vessels are transparent. You do not gaze through them as one might through modern glass. Instead, you meet the drink more directly, by smell, by heft, by the touch of the rim, by the sound it makes when set back on the table. Imagine lifting it now. The room is warm, the fire active nearby, the bench firm beneath you. The cup is not chilled. The drink meets the air of the room as naturally as everything else in it. Before you taste it, you smell it. Grain, fermentation, perhaps a little tang, perhaps sweetness if it is wine, perhaps the darker, earthier note of a brew that has not been made to please refined expectation so much as daily need. Then the first sip. It may be thicker than expected, rougher at the edges, less bright and less precise than modern drink. But that roughness belongs to its time. This is not a product of industrial consistency. It is a local creation, shaped by people, tools, ingredients, weather, skill, and chance. And because of that, drink in the tavern is never just liquid. It is information. A guest can judge a house by what is poured. A poor ale suggests carelessness, scarcity, or greed. A good one suggests competence and a certain pride. A better wine may signal status. A shared jug may mark companionship. To buy drink for another person is to perform a social act that means something at once understood and not always spoken. It can be generosity. It can be courtesy. It can be negotiation. It can be the opening move of a conversation from which one hopes to gain news, favor, or trust. That is why the serving of drink belongs so closely to the social order of the room. Who is served first, in what vessel, in what quantity, with what degree of attention, all of this can reveal subtle differences of status and expectation. A prosperous merchant may receive better wine or cleaner service. A regular known to the house may be trusted for another cup before settling his account. A poor traveler may get what he can afford, and no more. Yet even where these differences matter, the act itself remains fundamentally human and immediate. A cup passed from one hand to another. A bench shared. A pause in the evening, marked by swallowing warmth and grain, and the labor of others transformed into drink. Wine, where it appears, brings its own associations. It may suggest trade, distance, cultivation, or relative expense, depending on the place. It may be watered or not. It may be sour, strong, thin, or surprisingly good. It too varies with storage, travel, and honesty. Medieval tavern life was not a world of perfect quality control. Drink could be adulterated, stretched, or disappointing, yet it could also be deeply satisfying, especially to a person who had come in from cold air, road dust, or long work. Under such conditions, even an imperfect cup can feel restorative. There is also a rhythm to drinking here that differs from modern solitude. A tavern cup is almost always part of a larger scene. Someone else is speaking. A bench shifts. The fire cracks softly. A bowl is set down nearby. The room continues while you drink. You do not step away from the world when you lift the cup. You step further into the shared world of the tavern, where taste, talk, and observation happen at once, and after the first drink comes the fuller promise of the table. Because in a medieval tavern, hunger often stands beside thirst, and the cup is rarely the end of the story. Before long, attention turns from what is poured to what is carried steaming from the hearth, cut from the loaf, or set in bowls before those who have paid for a meal. What arrives at the table is not chosen from a printed list, and it is not arranged for display. In the medieval tavern, you eat what the house has, what the season allows, what the market has yielded, what has been stored, salted, baked, brewed, or simmered, since earlier in the day. That simplicity is part of the experience. A meal here is not about variety in the modern sense. It is about sustenance, warmth, and the easing of hunger after labor or travel. Bread is often the first and most familiar thing. Coarse, dense, practical bread, darker in color than many modern loaves, substantial in the hand, meant to fill the stomach and accompany whatever else can be had. A piece may be torn rather than neatly sliced. It may be set on the table with little ceremony, and yet to someone tired or cold, it carries its own kind of welcome. Bread in a tavern is more than an accompaniment. It is one of the foundations of the meal, the thing that steadies the body while drink warms it. Then there is pottage or stew, the great comfort of so many medieval tables. It may be made from grains, peas, beans, onions, leeks, herbs, cabbage, perhaps thickened by whatever the house can spare, perhaps enriched by bits of meat, perhaps only touched by it. Sometimes there is salted pork, sometimes a little fish, sometimes a broth carrying the memory of meat more than the substance of it. The exact contents change with region, season, status, and fortune, but the principle remains the same. A pot on the fire, something warm, something sustaining, something that can be ladled out to many. Imagine the bowl being placed before you now. Steam rises from it and carries the smell of onion, grain, broth, herbs, perhaps animal fat, if the house is doing well enough. Perhaps only the clean, plain scent of boiled food made honest by hunger. The bowl itself may be wooden or earthenware, worn smooth by use. It warms the hands as much as it feeds the stomach. In a cold season, that warmth matters almost as much as the food. To sit near a fire with a bowl before you and bread at hand is, in a medieval context, a genuine relief, not a quaint image, but a real easing of physical discomfort. Cheese may appear as well, hard or soft depending on local practice, cut plainly and served without decoration. Onions, leeks, or other vegetables might lie on the table or be worked into the pottage. Beans and peas are common allies against hunger. Cabbage appears often in one form or another. Salted fish may be available, especially where custom, trade, or fasting rules shape what is eaten. Salted meat, too, may enter the meal, though not always generously. Fresh meat is more costly, more dependent on circumstance, and less likely to be an everyday luxury for the poorer guest. That difference matters because food in the tavern, like drink, reveals social rank without needing to announce it. A prosperous traveler or merchant may receive a better cut, more plentiful bread, finer wine, more attentive service, perhaps a separate dish with something roasted rather than merely boiled. A poorer customer may have to content himself with the most basic fare, enough to fill, but not to impress. Yet even the plainest hot meal can feel rich to a person who has spent the day in wind, mud, rain, or toil. Medieval comfort is often measured differently from ours. It lies less in abundance and more in the contrast between hardship outside and shelter within. There are no polished plates, no elegant place settings in the modern sense, and often no great separation between one person's eating and another's. The table is shared. Elbows are close. Knives may be personal possessions. Hands do much of the work. The meal is practical, direct, and public. You are aware of others eating beside you, drinking beside you, speaking with mouths half full, wiping broth with bread, setting cups down with small thuds on the wood. The tavern meal is not private dining, it is communal sustenance, and there is something deeply grounding in that. The body understands it immediately. The room is warm, the bench is solid, the bowl is hot, the bread is coarse but filling. The firelight moves across the table. The smell of stew mingles with smoke and ale. Your shoulders loosen. Your attention shifts from the journey that brought you here to the immediate comforts of the present moment. In a world where travel could be hard, roads uncertain, and labor relentless, such a meal did not need refinement to feel valuable. It needed only to be real, warm, and enough. Even the imperfections belong to the scene. The broth may be thin, the bread may be stale at the edge, the salt may be strong, the cheese may be sharp, the bowl may be chipped. None of this removes the significance of the meal. If anything, it roots the experience more firmly in the ordinary truth of medieval life. Taverns were not dream palaces of endless feasting. They were working houses feeding living people with what could be made available. And while those people eat, they do not fall silent for long. The meal is part of the sound of the room. Spoon against bowl, bread torn, cups lifted and set down, a comment on the quality of the stew, a joke shared across the bench, a traveler answering a question between mouthfuls, a keeper calling for another loaf to be brought out. Eating and talking belong together here, and because they do, the tavern becomes something more than a place of food and drink alone. It becomes a place of exchange, not only of coin for ale or bread for hunger, but of words for attention, of stories for interest, of rumor for rumor, of warning for warning. As the meal settles and the cup is refilled, another current in the room grows stronger, perhaps the most important current of all in a world without newspapers, telephones, or printed daily accounts. People begin to listen as much as they speak. This is one of the most important things to understand about the medieval tavern. It is not only a place of eating and drinking, it is a place where news lives. In a world without newspapers spread fresh each morning, without wires, broadcasts, or messages crossing great distances in an instant, information moves at the speed of people. It travels in saddlebags and memory, in gossip and observation, in fragments carried from village to town and town to road. And because of that, a tavern becomes something like a crossroads of voices. Listen for a moment to the room around you now. Beneath the ordinary sounds of cups, benches, and low conversation, there is another quality in the air, a certain attentiveness. People do not only come here to speak, they come here to hear. A traveler entering the room is more than another customer. He is a possible bearer of the world beyond the next street, beyond the next town, beyond the next river crossing. A merchant may know the prices in a market 2 days away. A pilgrim may have heard of sickness in a shrine town. A carter may know which road has turned to mud and which bridge has failed. A messenger, even if he says little, may be watched closely simply because he has clearly come from somewhere else. This gives the tavern a particular energy, not always loud, but alert. News does not arrive with ceremony. It seeps into the room through casual questions. Where have you come from? How are the roads? Is the ferry running? Have you heard anything from the north? Is it true the Lord is ill? Did the market at the last town do well? Has there been trouble on the road? A question tossed lightly across a table may carry real weight. The answer may affect tomorrow's journey, next week's prices, or the fears of an entire neighborhood. Some of what is said is reliable. Much of it is not, or not entirely. That, too, is part of the tavern's reality. Information in the medieval world is rarely complete. It comes in pieces, colored by memory, pride, anxiety, hearsay, or misunderstanding. A rumor begins as one man's uncertain report and grows firmer with each retelling. A tax is said to be coming. Soldiers are said to have been seen. A river is said to be unsafe. A disease is said to be moving from one town to another. Sometimes such reports prove true. Sometimes they swell in importance as they pass from mouth to mouth. The tavern is both a house of knowledge and a workshop of exaggeration. Yet this does not make it trivial. Quite the opposite. In a world where little can be confirmed quickly, rumor itself becomes valuable. Even uncertain news is better than none. To hear that there may be robbers on the southern road is enough to change a traveler's plans. To hear that grain prices are rising in a nearby market may influence what a merchant buys or withholds. To hear that a noble household is preparing for mourning may alter expectations in the surrounding district. Whether fully true or partly distorted, such information shapes behavior. The spoken world matters because it is the world available to ordinary people, and the tavern gathers that world under one roof. Imagine one corner of the room where a traveler has been drawn into conversation. He has only just begun his meal, yet already the questions come. Not aggressive, perhaps, but eager. He shrugs at one, answers another, pauses to drink, then adds some detail he had not thought important. At once, someone farther down the table leans in. Another man repeats part of what he said to his companion. The keeper, passing with a jug, hears enough to register the substance. Within minutes, the room contains more knowledge than it did before, though not everyone has received it in the same form. In another part of the tavern, locals trade the smaller news that shapes daily life just as surely. A neighbor's daughter is to be married. A cooper has taken ill. The mill is behind in its work. A cart axle broke near the square. There will be fewer fish tomorrow. A priest has delivered a stern sermon. A quarrel from the market has not yet been settled. These things may seem minor beside rumors of kings or war, but to the people living there they are often more immediate. Medieval life is built as much from local knowledge as from great events, and the tavern is one of the places where local knowledge settles, spreads, and acquires force. This is why the tavern can feel so dense with human presence, even when no one is speaking very loudly. Every table may hold its own thread of information. One person listens while pretending not to. Another offers news indirectly, enjoying the attention. Another measures what he hears against what he already knows. Skepticism exists here too. Medieval people were not fools simply because they lived in a spoken culture. They knew that stories grew in the telling. They knew that travelers boasted, that frightened people imagined the worst, that politics could distort truth, that bad memory and strong drink made poor companions. But they also knew that useful knowledge often arrived in just this imperfect form, so the art of listening mattered. One learned to weigh the speaker, to compare versions, to notice confidence, detail, hesitation, contradiction. A merchant accustomed to the road might be trusted on routes and tolls. A pious traveler might be taken seriously on the condition of shrines and lodging houses. A known exaggerator might still entertain, but his reports would be discounted. The tavern becomes, in this way, not simply a place where words are exchanged, but a place where they are judged. And all of this happens in the midst of ordinary life. A bowl is emptied. Bread is broken. A cup is filled again. Firelight flickers across a face as someone lowers his voice to mention something troubling. A listener frowns. Another laughs and dismisses the whole thing. Someone at the next bench catches only half the story, and by the time he repeats it later, the shape has changed. This is how a great deal of the medieval world becomes known to itself. There is something deeply intimate about that. We are used to information arriving polished, printed, framed by authority, or at least by systems larger than any single room. The tavern reminds us of another way of knowing, one built from nearness, repetition, and trust imperfectly placed. It is slower, more human, more vulnerable to error, but also more social. News is not consumed in isolation. It is heard among others, reacted to among others, and folded immediately into the life of the community. So while the tavern may appear at first to be all smoke, ale, and rough benches, it is also something more subtle and more powerful. It is a chamber of voices in which the medieval world is continually assembled out of scraps of travel, memory, fear, commerce, and talk. To visit a tavern is to sit inside the living network by which ordinary people learned what lay beyond their own doors. And as the night goes on, those voices do not remain solemn for long. Information gives way to anecdote, anecdote to laughter, laughter to song, teasing, games, and the passing entertainments by which people mark the hours before sleep. As the evening deepens and the first hunger has been eased, the mood of the tavern begins to change. Not all at once, and not in every corner of the room equally, but gradually, like the shifting of firelight along a wall. The sharper edge of arrival softens. The questions asked of travelers have been answered, at least for now. The first cups have been drained and filled again. The body settles more deeply onto the bench. Voices that were once practical become looser, more playful, more willing to linger over a story, a joke, a remembered incident, or a tune half forgotten and then found again. This is the hour when the tavern becomes not only a place of shelter and information, but also a place of passing pleasure. Medieval people did not live in a world of constant formal entertainment. Much of what relieved the day's labor came from one another. That truth can be felt clearly here. No stage is needed, no announcement is required. The room itself becomes the instrument of amusement. At one table, someone begins a story. It may be about a foolish neighbor, a trick played in the market, a misjudged horse, an argument with a miller, a night spent on a wet road, or some half-true memory improved by repetition. What matters is not always the story itself, but the telling. The pauses, the gestures, the look toward those who already know the ending, the slight enlargement of every detail as the teller gains confidence from the laughter around him. A good storyteller in such a room is not simply reporting events. He is shaping them to fit the bench, the fire, the listening faces, and the mood of the hour. Elsewhere there may be song. Not refined performance in the modern sense, and not necessarily beautiful, but communal sound, carried by memory rather than sheet music, by habit rather than rehearsal. One voice starts, another joins, and then perhaps several more. The melody may wander a little, the words may not always agree from one mouth to another, yet that hardly matters. The purpose is not perfection, it is participation. A tavern song belongs to the room because the room itself completes it, with rough harmony, table-thumping rhythm, and laughter when someone loses the line or invents a new one. You can imagine the beat of a hand on wood, slow at first, then stronger as others join. Cups tremble slightly with the rhythm. A man at the far end of the bench adds the chorus louder than the rest. Someone who cannot sing at all tries anyway, and that too becomes part of the entertainment. Even those who do not join listen with the expression of people who have heard such things many times and still find comfort in them. Song in a tavern is not only noise, it is familiarity made audible. There may be games as well, most often simple ones, portable ones, the kinds of games that belong easily on a rough table or in the palm of a hand. Dice are among the most common images for a reason. They bring risk, amusement, boasting, suspicion, and quick reversals of fortune all at once. A pair of dice thrown on wood can hold a small audience for several minutes. Men lean in. Someone mutters that the throw was lucky. Someone else accuses another of having a devil's favor with the bones. Coins, tokens, or promises may change hands. The game itself is small, but the emotion around it can be large. Not every tavern evening contains all of these things, of course. Some rooms are quieter, some rougher, some more heavily shaped by travelers passing through than by regulars with time to spare. Yet even in a modest house, the hours after food and first drink often take on this more relaxed character. The room exhales. The business of the day loosens its grip. What remains is a slower, warmer social life in which people do not merely endure one another's presence, but actively fill the shared space with voice and gesture. There are quieter entertainments too. A repeated joke between regulars, a friendly insult exchanged with practiced timing, the keeper rolling his eyes at some familiar boast, a dog asleep under the table, stirring only when a crust falls near its nose, a man near the fire who never says much, but whose dry remark, offered at the right moment, draws more laughter than a louder guest's entire story. These small patterns matter. They give the tavern its memory. They make it more than a room rented anew each night. They make it a place where habits of companionship take root. And still, beneath all of this, the fire continues its patient work. It cracks softly in the hearth. It throws shadows upward as the candles burn lower. The benches seem more settled now, the room more enclosed, the night outside more remote. Even the noise changes in quality as the hour grows later. Early evening laughter is brighter, quicker, touched with the freshness of recent arrival. Later laughter is deeper, slower, carried by weariness and warmth. The body relaxes into it differently. This is one reason the tavern could feel so vital in medieval life. It offered a form of leisure that did not depend on wealth, literacy, or elaborate preparation. It only required people gathered together with enough time left in the evening to share what they carried in memory, voice, and mood. A song, a tale, a game of dice, a joke across a bench. These were small things, perhaps, but small things can matter greatly in hard lives. They mark the difference between merely eating indoors and feeling, for an hour or two, that one belongs to a living circle of human company. Yet the same looseness that makes room for laughter can also make room for trouble. Drink warms the blood as well as the spirit. Jokes can cut too sharply. Games can stir resentment. A stranger's remark can be taken the wrong way. In a tavern, comfort and tension are never very far apart, and the same room that holds song can, under the wrong turn of mood, become wary and watchful in an instant. That possibility is always present, even in a room that seems warm and easy. The medieval tavern could be welcoming, comforting, and familiar, but it could also become tense with surprising speed. Where there is drink, there is loosened judgment. Where there is gambling, there is disappointment. Where strangers and locals meet in close quarters, there is always the chance of insult, misunderstanding, or simple mistrust. None of this means that every tavern was a den of violence. Most evenings, no doubt, passed without serious trouble, but the reputation of taverns for quarrels and petty danger did not arise from nowhere. A traveler in such a place would have understood that, almost instinctively, he might sit, eat, and drink much as anyone else, yet still keep one part of his attention alert. A purse would be better kept close than left carelessly on a bench. A knife, though ordinary enough as a tool, also carried the possibility of threat in the wrong mood. A boast, especially from a man with drink in him, might be wise to ignore rather than answer. Medieval life taught caution early, and the tavern, for all its warmth, was never free of the need for it. Much of the danger was small rather than dramatic. A coin missing, a game of dice that turns sour because one man thinks another has cheated, a spilled drink taken as an insult instead of an accident, a local resenting the confidence of a stranger misreading the tone of the room and speaking too boldly where he should have listened. These are the kinds of frictions from which larger trouble can grow, not because anyone entered with grand villainy in mind, but because fatigue, pride, drink, and crowding all wear away patience. Imagine a table where a game has gone on too long. At first there is laughter, then sharper laughter, then silence between throws. One player leans in too quickly. Another closes his hand over the coins before anyone else thinks the game settled. A third man, not even part of the play, mutters that he saw something unfair. Shoulders stiffen. The air changes. No one has risen yet, but others nearby begin to notice. A keeper watches from across the room. This, too, is part of the knowledge of tavern life. The ability to sense when ordinary noise has changed into something narrower and more dangerous. The same is true of conversation. A joke among friends can sound like mockery to someone else. News from the road can stir fear or anger. A remark about a lord, a tax, a village, a family, or a trade can touch pride where no harm was intended. In a society where honor and reputation mattered keenly, words were not always light things, and in a room where people are close together, already tired, already heated by fire and drink, there is little space for tempers to cool unnoticed. That is one reason tavern keepers and those who worked in such houses needed more than the ability to pour drink and serve food. They needed judgment. They had to know when to ignore a loud voice and when to intervene. They had to remember who was habitually troublesome, who was all noise and no danger, who should never be seated too near whom, who might pay late but peaceably, and who might bring real disorder into the room. Running a tavern meant managing mood as well as provisions. Local authorities knew this too. Taverns drew people together, and wherever people gathered in number, medieval authorities saw both necessity and risk. Drinking houses could be taxed, watched, regulated, or criticized because they were places where idleness, gossip, gaming, prostitution, theft, and violence were thought likely to collect. Some of that concern was moral anxiety, some of it practical governance. A tavern was useful, even essential, but never entirely comfortable from the point of view of order. It was too social, too noisy, too hard to predict. For that reason, a visitor would often enter the room with an awareness not only of comfort, but of calculation. Which bench is safest? Which guests seem peaceful? Is the house well run? Is the keeper attentive? Are the regulars steady or already deep in drink? Does the room feel settled, or does it carry that restless edge that warns sensible people not to linger longer than necessary? These judgments might happen quickly, almost below the level of conscious thought, but they could matter very much. And yet, the presence of danger does not erase the tavern's hospitality. It simply complicates it. The same room that offers warmth also requires awareness. The same crowd that gives companionship also asks you to guard your purse. The same game that provides amusement can become a grievance. This mixture is part of what makes the tavern feel real. It is not an ideal refuge. It is an ordinary human refuge, and ordinary human places are rarely simple. Still, even where caution is wise, the night moves onward. Some guests will finish their cups and step back into the dark street. Others will remain until the room thins and the fire burns lower. And for those who have come from farther away, or who cannot easily go home before morning, the tavern may offer one more thing beyond food, drink, and company. It may offer a place to sleep, rough though that place is likely to be. If the tavern also serves as a place of lodging, then the night does not end at the table. For some guests, especially travelers, the next stage of the experience begins when they rise from the bench, gather what belongs to them, and look towards the stair or passage leading upward, or toward whatever corner of the building has been given over to sleep. This, too, is worth imagining clearly, because medieval lodging was far removed from the privacy and comfort many people now take for granted. Yet for the weary traveler, even rough shelter could feel like a blessing. The way upward is often narrow. A stair may creak beneath the weight of each step, worn by years of use and polished smooth in places by countless boots. The air changes as you climb. It is often cooler away from the direct heat of the hearth below, though the smell of smoke still lingers in the timbers. Behind you, the sounds of the common room soften, but do not disappear. You still hear the low murmur of talk, the shifting of benches, the occasional laugh rising and fading. The life of the tavern continuing beneath the floorboards as you move toward a more private, though never truly private, part of the house. At the top of the stair, or beyond a passage, the lodging room reveals itself with the same plain practicality as everything else in the tavern. This is not a chamber arranged for elegance. It is a place set aside so that bodies may lie down and endure the night under cover. There may be one room for several people, or several cramped rooms depending on the size and prosperity of the house. Beds, where they exist, may be simple frames strung with rope or rough wooden structures topped with straw-filled mattresses. Some sleeping places may be little more than pallets or heaps of bedding laid out as needed. A blanket, if offered, is useful, though not always especially clean. Everything here speaks of necessity first. The smell of such a room is its own mixture. Straw, dust, wool, human breath, damp cloth hung to dry, old timber, the faint residue of smoke worked into every surface. It is not usually as warm as the main room below, and in colder seasons, that difference would be felt sharply. The fire's comfort does not climb the stairs in full. Instead, the sleeper depends on blankets, cloaks, body heat, and the simple mercy of being indoors rather than outside on the road. Privacy is scarce. This may be one of the greatest shocks to a modern imagination. To stay in a medieval tavern often meant sharing a chamber with strangers, hearing them settle, cough, mutter in sleep, turn beneath blankets, or snore through the night. A prosperous traveler might secure better arrangements if the house could provide them, but many could not expect such luxury. Shared space was normal. The idea that every guest should have a room of his own belongs to a much later standard of comfort. Here, what matters is shelter first, separation only if fortune allows it. And of course, there are the less pleasant truths as well. Bedding in the medieval world could harbor fleas, lice, or bedbugs. Straw grows stale, blankets hold the memory of previous sleepers, a mattress may sag, a draft may find its way through boards, shutters, or poorly fitted walls. The body, however grateful for rest, is not always granted ease. Yet exhaustion is a powerful ally. A person who has spent the day in the saddle, on foot, or exposed to bad weather, may sink onto even a poor bed with real relief. Medieval lodging was often judged not by softness, but by whether it kept out wind, rain, and thieves well enough for the night to pass. There is something strangely intimate about such a chamber, even when it is uncomfortable. Several strangers brought together by road and circumstance, lying in the same dark room, each carrying his own destination, his own worries, his own half-known story. One may be asleep in moments. Another may lie awake longer, listening to the wood settle, the muffled movement below, the shifting breath of those nearby. Through a shuttered window, there may come the faintest trace of moonlight, or none at all. Darkness indoors is deep. Without modern light, the room can disappear almost entirely once the candle is out. In that darkness, the tavern below still exists as a kind of memory. The warmth of the fire, the bowl on the table, the sound of voices, the smell of ale and wood smoke. Now those things recede, and what remains is the simpler reality of travel and rest. The body unlaces itself from the day. Boots are removed, cloak folded or kept close, purse placed where a hand can find it quickly, a final glance perhaps at the door or at the shape of others settling nearby. Then sleep, if it comes not as luxury, but as surrender to fatigue. For many people in the medieval world, that would have been enough. Not comfort in the modern sense, but shelter. Not privacy, but safety of a kind. Not silence, but a roof over the head and walls between the sleeper and the night. The tavern as lodging reveals something essential about the age. People were often willing to accept conditions we would find coarse, provided those conditions answered the most urgent needs of body and circumstance. To be inside, fed and horizontal before dawn was already a form of good fortune. And yet, even here, in the upper room, it is worth remembering that none of this happens by accident. The bed, poor as it may be, had to be prepared. The blankets, however rough, had to be kept somewhere. The food downstairs had to be cooked. The ale had to be brewed or purchased. The casks had to be moved. The fire had to be fed. The tavern that seems, from the guest's point of view, like a refuge at the end of the road, is also a business, a household, and a place of ceaseless labor that begins long before the visitor arrives and continues after he falls asleep. By the time a guest sits down with a cup in hand or climbs the stair to a rough bed above, much of the tavern's true work has already been done out of sight. That is easy to forget, because the tavern presents itself most vividly as an experience: warmth, smoke, food, noise, company. But underneath that experience lies labor, and a great deal of it. A medieval tavern is not only a room full of people. It is an enterprise, a household, and a machine of daily survival held together by skill, memory, and constant effort. Think first of the drink itself. Ale does not appear by magic in the cask. It must be brewed, and brewing requires grain, water, fuel, vessels, time, and knowledge. Ingredients must be gathered or purchased. The brew must be watched, handled, and stored. A bad batch is not just a disappointment. It is lost income, damaged reputation, and a problem for everyone who depends on the house. Wine, if the tavern serves it, brings its own complications of transport, storage, spoilage, and expense. Every cup poured in the common room begins somewhere in a chain of labor that reaches outward into fields, markets, roads, and storerooms. The same is true of food. Bread must be baked or acquired. Vegetables must be cut, washed, stored, or preserved as best conditions allow. Meat, fish, cheese, and grain all depend on season, trade, local supply, and the careful balancing of what can be offered now against what must last until later. A pot simmering at the hearth seems simple enough when one sees only the bowl set down on the table. But even the plainest pottage is the end result of planning. Someone had to know what remained in store, what could be stretched, what needed using first, and how to feed a roomful of different appetites without waste becoming ruinous. Then there is the fire, which in many ways is the heart of the tavern's economy as much as its comfort. Fuel is never trivial. Wood must be chopped, stacked, bought, or hauled. A fire must be lit, tended, judged, and maintained. Too little heat, and the room grows inhospitable. The food does not cook properly. The guests are displeased. Too much carelessness, and the risks of smoke, damage, or even disaster rise sharply. In a world built largely of timber and thatch, fire is both servant and danger. To manage it well is part of the keeper's craft. The room itself must also be maintained, however rough its standards may seem to us now. Tables need scrubbing. Rushes or straw on the floor must be changed. Cups and bowls must be washed as well as circumstances allow. Spills must be managed, benches righted, broken items replaced or repaired. Deliveries must be received. Casks rolled into place. Accounts remembered. Debts noted. Regulars recognized. Untrustworthy customers watched. A tavern is not simply open or closed. It is constantly being kept from disorder by the hands and attention of those who run it. That is why the tavern keeper occupies such an important position. Whether man or woman, whether operating alone, with family, or with servants, the keeper must be host, manager, judge, buyer, seller, and peacekeeper all at once. This is not passive work. It requires knowing how much can be charged, what the local market will bear, who is good for payment, who must pay at once, whose complaint matters, whose boasting can be ignored, and when a room is about to go sour. The best keepers would have been those who combined practical knowledge with a kind of social intelligence, reading not only casks and supplies, but moods, habits, and the small shifts in tone that tell whether a house is prospering or slipping into trouble. And because taverns stand close to the life of the road and the town, they are woven into larger systems of trade and movement. Farmers, brewers, bakers, carriers, coopers, fish sellers, butchers, servants, and neighbors all, in one way or another, help sustain the tavern's existence. A busy house can become an anchor in local life, a place where goods pass through, where labor gathers, where travel pauses and resumes. It is both dependent on the community and useful to it. A traveler needs the tavern, but the tavern also needs a world around it constantly producing, moving, and exchanging. Seen this way, the medieval tavern becomes even more interesting. It is not merely picturesque. It is infrastructural. It supports movement, trade, communication, and ordinary bodily need. It turns raw ingredients into meals, grain into drink, fuel into warmth, and empty space into a temporary social world. It makes road life possible for some, and town life more connected for others. Even its roughness belongs to this reality. It is not rough because people lacked imagination. It is rough because the work of maintaining hospitality in the medieval world was demanding, expensive, and never fully separable from the rest of household labor. This is one reason taverns endured and multiplied despite suspicion from moralists or authorities. Whatever people might say against drinking houses, communities needed them. Travelers required shelter. Locals required places to meet, eat, hear news, and make small exchanges of trade and trust. The tavern answered too many practical needs to be dismissed as mere indulgence. It occupied that very old human space between commerce and comfort, between household and public life, between necessity and sociability. And yet, for all its labor and practical importance, the tavern is often remembered through a haze of fantasy. We picture it more cleanly than it was, more romantically, more evenly lit, more spacious, more charming. To understand it properly, it helps to pause now and look directly at that contrast between the imagined tavern of modern storytelling and the rough, vivid, deeply human reality of the medieval one. The tavern that lives in the modern imagination is often a place of polished wood, glowing hearths, cheerful music, and just enough roughness to feel charming without ever becoming unpleasant. It is spacious where the real tavern was crowded, clean where the real tavern was worn by use, picturesque where the real tavern was practical, and comfortably theatrical where the real tavern was deeply ordinary. That imagined tavern has become one of the most familiar rooms in historical fantasy, and for that reason, it can be hard to look past it and see the medieval original clearly. In the fantasy version, the light is usually warm and generous, filling the whole room in a way that lets every face be seen, every beam admired, every cup lifted in a flattering glow. In the real medieval tavern, light was much less obedient. Firelight flickered and shifted. Candles were limited. Corners dissolved into shadow. A room emerged slowly to the eye, and much of its life was understood through sound, smell, and movement rather than crisp visibility. The atmosphere was not arranged for beauty. It was simply the result of fuel, smoke, architecture, and darkness held at bay as best people could manage. The same softening happens with comfort. Modern imagination tends to picture the tavern as cozy first and rough second. But for most medieval visitors, roughness was not a decorative touch. It was the substance of the experience. Benches were hard, floors were uneven, air was smoky, clothes were damp, cups were plain, privacy was scarce. The room was communal, not because that felt charming, but because it was the practical form hospitality often took. One did not go to a tavern expecting refinement unless one had the means to seek a better class of house, and even then only within the limits of the age. And yet fantasy is not wrong about everything. It understands, at least in spirit, something true. A tavern really could be a place of warmth against cold, of companionship against loneliness, of food and drink after effort, of stories shared in a common room while darkness gathered outside. That part is real. The problem is not that the modern imagination finds comfort there. The problem is that it usually strips away the conditions that made that comfort meaningful. Warmth matters more when one has truly felt the cold. A bowl of stew matters more when hunger is ordinary. Company matters more when travel is slow, roads are uncertain, and night closes in without street lamps or easy rescue. The real medieval tavern was harsher than fantasy, but also in some ways more impressive. Its comfort was not manufactured by design. It was carved out of difficulty. It stood in a world of mud, smoke, labor, season, and constant practical limitation, and within that world, it created a temporary refuge. Not a perfect refuge, not always a safe one, not a clean or quiet one, but a human one. That matters. It means the tavern's warmth was earned. It was a victory, however modest, over darkness, hunger, and exposure. Modern stories also tend to place the hero at the center of the room, as if the tavern exists to receive one remarkable person. Real medieval taverns were not built around individual destiny. They were built around shared need. A traveler entered as one among many, noticed and judged perhaps, but folded quickly into the life already in progress. The room did not pause for him. Its fire was already burning. Its stew was already on the pot. Its regulars were already seated. Its news was already circulating. To visit a real tavern was not to command a scene, but to join one. That difference is worth lingering over, because it reveals something important about medieval life itself. Much of it was lived in common. Common labor, common risk, common worship, common rumor, common dependence on harvests, roads, seasons, and local authority. The tavern reflects this shared condition with unusual clarity. It is a place where individuality is visible, certainly, but always within the press of others. The fantasy tavern flatters the individual. The real tavern reminds you that ordinary life was social in ways that could comfort, constrain, and expose all at once. There is also the matter of cleanliness, one of the places where the modern imagination is most forgiving. A little rustic disorder may appear in an imagined tavern, but rarely the full reality of spilled ale soaked into wood, rushes holding dirt underfoot, the smell of damp wool near the fire, the traces of animals nearby, the imperfect washing of bowls and cups, the ceaseless struggle to keep a busy house from slipping into squalor. The real tavern was not filthy at every moment, and many keepers surely worked hard to maintain standards. But its standards belonged to a different world, one where use left deeper marks and resources for controlling them were more limited. Still, none of this should make the real place seem lifeless or grim beyond recognition. Quite the opposite. When stripped of fantasy polish, the tavern becomes more vivid, more textured, more bodily, more immediate. You can feel the bench beneath you, smell the smoke in the beams, hear the scrape of a cup, sense the caution with which a stranger enters, notice the way people turn toward news as naturally as toward drink. It becomes less a decorative backdrop and more a living institution, woven into the fabric of the town and the road. So perhaps the best way to think of the medieval tavern is this. Fantasy remembers the glow. History restores the smoke. Fantasy remembers the fellowship. History restores the crowding, the rank, the labor, the dirt, the uncertainty. Fantasy remembers the song. History restores the weary bodies that needed song in the first place. Together, they point toward the same human truth. But one is easier to love, and the other is truer to life. And once that truth comes into focus, the room changes again. It becomes less a stage set and more a place where one can simply sit, quietly now, near the hearth as the night deepens, and let all its sounds and meanings gather into something slower, softer, and more reflective. Now imagine that the evening has moved well past its first liveliness. The brightest laughter has softened. The sharpest questions have already been asked and answered. The bowls are emptier. The benches seem to hold their occupants more heavily. Outside, the town has grown quieter, though now and then the wind may still find the shutters, or a distant sound may travel through the dark. Inside, the tavern remains warm, and the warmth has taken on a different quality. It no longer feels like the sudden relief of arrival. It feels settled, almost enveloping, as if the room itself has exhaled. This is the hour when a person might simply sit and watch the fire. There is something deeply restful in that, even in a medieval tavern. The hearth, which earlier seemed the center of movement and service, now becomes the center of stillness. The flames are lower, perhaps, or else the eye has grown used to their motion. Coals glow beneath charred wood. Light rises and falls across the room with a slower rhythm. Faces nearest the fire drift in and out of brightness. A hand turns a cup absently on the table. Someone stretches tired legs toward the heat. Another leans back against the wall and listens rather than speaks. If you were truly here at such an hour, you would begin to feel time differently. In the modern world, evening is often cut into precise pieces measured by clocks, appointments, screens, and the expectation of continual motion. But here, in the tavern, time has another texture. It gathers. It pools. It is measured by the lowering of the fire, by the length of shadows, by the slowing of voices, by the number of times a cup has been refilled, by the way weariness settles into the shoulders and eyes of everyone in the room. This slower time is one of the most powerful things the tavern offers, not because it is peaceful in any ideal sense, but because it allows the body to stop bracing itself against the road, the weather, the task, the next demand. To sit by a fire after dark, in a room where others are also growing quiet, is to enter a shared pause. No one needs to announce it. It simply arrives. The room that earlier carried many conversations now holds more silence between them. Speech continues, but in lower tones. A remark crosses the bench, then another, and then there is a stretch in which only the fire speaks clearly. You might hear the small sounds more distinctly now. A cup set down with care instead of force. Cloth shifting as someone resettles on the bench. The soft stir of straw underfoot when a servant passes. A log settling in the hearth. A breath that becomes the beginning of a snore from one corner before its owner wakes slightly and shifts position. Somewhere farther back, two men still talk quietly, but their words no longer seek the whole room. They belong only to each other. There is comfort in this narrowing of sound. The tavern becomes less public in feeling, even while remaining shared. Earlier, it gathered many separate energies into one common noise. Now it gathers many tired bodies into one common hush. Even those who are still awake seem to protect the quiet instinctively. The room has done its loud work. It has fed, warmed, informed, amused, and tested those within it. Now it is doing something simpler and perhaps more fundamental. It is allowing people to rest while still in the company of others. For a traveler, this might be one of the most memorable parts of the whole experience. Not the first step inside, not the first cup, not even the first hot meal, but this later moment when the journey loosens its hold on the body. The legs no longer feel ready to continue. The mind, which had been alert to roads, strangers, prices, weather, and danger, begins at last to unclench. The fire is before you. The bench supports you. Your hands are warm. The room around you is inhabited, and that habitation itself is reassuring. However rough the tavern may be, however smoky, however crowded, it has become for this hour a shelter in the deepest sense. And this shelter is not only physical. There is emotional shelter here too, though medieval people might not have named it that way. To be among other human beings at the end of a difficult day, to hear the low murmur of life continuing, to feel that one need not keep moving, that one may simply exist for a while in warmth and shadow, this is no small thing. It is one of the oldest comforts our species knows. Firelight, company, enclosure, and the suspension of immediate danger. The tavern, for all its flaws, gathers these together. If you look around the room now, you may notice how different everyone seems from when you first entered. The merchant no longer carries himself with quite the same alert distinction. The laborer's shoulders have dropped. The young apprentice has grown quieter, his earlier noise spent. Even the keeper, though still working, moves with the practiced economy of someone bringing the night gradually toward its close. The room is no longer displaying social types. It is revealing human fatigue, and there is something equalizing in that. Firelight makes everyone look a little more alike at the end of the day. Outside, the night waits. The street is cooler now than when you arrived. The sign still hangs above the doorway, but the lane beneath it is darker and less traveled. Soon, one by one, those still seated will have to choose whether to climb the stair, if they are staying, or gather their cloak and step back out into the dark. But for this moment, no one is yet required to move. The tavern holds them all in suspension. That may be the truest image of the medieval tavern after all. Not the loud song, not the quarrel, not even the first dramatic opening of the door, but this quieter hour near the hearth, when the room has become a pocket of warmth against a much larger darkness, and ordinary people, with all their worries and weariness, are allowed for a little while to be still. And then, at last, the moment comes to leave. You rise from the bench more slowly than you sat down. The warmth that had wrapped itself around you now makes the thought of the outside air seem sharper than before. For a little while, the tavern had become its own world, complete enough that the street beyond the door almost ceased to matter. But no night indoors lasts forever. Cups are emptied, fires burn lower, voices fade. The hour itself asks something of everyone still awake. Stay and sleep, if there is space and coin enough, or step back out into the dark and make your way home, or onward beneath the night sky. As you move toward the door, the room changes once again. The hearth is no longer directly before you. The benches fall away behind. The familiar haze of smoke, which a few moments earlier seemed almost comforting, thins slightly near the entrance where the drafts move in and out. The sounds of the room gather behind you into a single low murmur, no longer surrounding you, but following at your back. It is strange how quickly a place can begin to feel distant, even before you have fully left it. Then the door opens, and the night air meets you at once. It feels cooler than it did when you first arrived. Perhaps the temperature has dropped as the evening has deepened. Perhaps it only seems colder because you have been sitting by the fire. Either way, the difference is immediate and unmistakable. The air on your face is damp or sharp, depending on the season. It carries less smoke from the room now, and more of the larger night outside, earth, wood, distant hearths, perhaps a hint of rain, perhaps only the clean chill of darkness settling over stone, mud, and roof thatch. For a moment, as you stand in the doorway or just beyond it, the tavern remains behind you like a pool of warmth and light. Its firelight spills only a short way into the lane, but that little glow seems vivid against the dark. The voices within are muffled now, softened by the wall and the partly closed door. What had felt large inside suddenly seems contained from out here. One bright human chamber set into the greater quiet of the sleeping town. And the town does feel different now than it did on the way in. Earlier, the streets held the tail end of evening activity. People were still moving with purpose. Windows still glowed more often. Carts and steps and voices still marked the close of day. Now there is more stillness between sounds. The lane seems wider in the dark, even if it is narrow. The houses lean over the street in silence. A shutter may rattle faintly in the wind. Somewhere far off, a dog answers another. Perhaps a church bell sounds the hour, its tone slower and lonelier in the deepened night. Your own footsteps become more distinct to you because there are fewer others to blend with them. If you turn and look back once, you see the sign again above the entrance, moving slightly in the night air. Beneath it, the doorway has resumed its ordinary shape. It is no longer an opening into a crowded room you have not yet seen. Now, it is a place you know. You know the heat inside, the smell of smoke in the rafters, the roughness of the benches, the taste of the ale, the murmur of voices, the fire at the center. The building has become fuller in your mind than it appears from the street. That is part of what makes leaving feel faintly dreamlike. Outside, the tavern looks almost modest again. Inside, it contains an entire temporary world. This is one of the quiet truths of medieval life. So much depended on such places. Not grand halls, not castles, not churches alone, but these smaller communal interiors where people ate, drank, heard news, judged strangers, rested weary limbs, and found for a few hours a kind of protection from the dark. Standing outside now, with the night closing softly around the lane, you understand more clearly what the tavern offered, not because it was luxurious, but because so much of the world beyond its door was uncertain, cold, and unwelcoming after sunset. As you walk away, the sound of the tavern fades gradually. First, the laughter disappears, then the deeper murmur of conversation, then even the sense of movement within. Soon, only the memory of it remains, the warmth on your clothes, the smell of wood smoke caught in wool, the heaviness of food and drink settled pleasantly in the body, the slight weariness that comes after sitting long in firelight. These small traces travel with you into the street, and perhaps that is how the tavern lived on in memory for medieval people too. Not always as a dramatic place, though drama could happen there. Not always as a cheerful one, though laughter certainly belonged to it. But as a necessary pause in the flow of harder things. A stop between labor and sleep. A room between road and road. A warmth between two stretches of cold. The experience of leaving it and feeling the night gather around you once more would have made its value unmistakable. You continue along the lane now, and the mud or packed earth beneath your feet feels familiar again. The town, which once led you toward the tavern, now receives you back from it. Windows are darker. The smoke above the roofs is less visible. The sky is deeper overhead. Somewhere, behind walls and shutters, other fires are also burning low. Other households also settling into sleep. The tavern is not the whole town, but for a little while, it had seemed like the heart of a shared evening, and walking away from it leaves a silence shaped by what has just been left behind. Soon, even the sign is lost to sight. What remains is the knowledge of what it was really like to visit a medieval tavern, not the polished fantasy of it, but the lived experience, the muddy street before it, the sign in the dimness, the sudden heat at the door, the smoke, the benches, the crowded room, the ale in the cup, the bread and stew, the rumors carried from road to road, the laughter, the caution, the weariness, the fire-lit quiet as the night deepened. All of it part of one ordinary and remarkable institution that stood at the meeting point of hunger, labor, travel, and human company. And perhaps, as you walk on through the dark, that is the final feeling the medieval tavern leaves with you. Not romance exactly, and not comfort without cost, but something older and steadier. The sense that wherever people have faced cold, distance, uncertainty, and the long hours after sunset, they have sought out places like this, places where a door opens, warmth spills out, and for a little while the world becomes more bearable. What, then, was it really like to visit a medieval tavern? It was not like stepping into a fantasy painting where every candle burns cleanly, every beam glows warmly, and every guest seems placed there for the sake of a story. It was more physical than that, more immediate, more crowded, more worn by daily use. It was a place felt first through the body, through the chill of the street giving way to heat at the door, through the smell of smoke worked into old timber, through the press of shared benches and the weight of a cup in the hand, through the relief of hot food after labor or travel, through the simple fact of being indoors, under a roof, while darkness settled outside. A medieval tavern was never just a room for drinking. It was a meeting point for needs that were both ordinary and deeply important. Hunger led people there. Thirst led them there. Fatigue led them there. Business led them there. Curiosity led them there. Loneliness may have led some there as well. It was a place where the working day did not simply end, but changed form, where labor turned into rest, where travel turned into pause, where private worries entered a public room and mixed with the worries of others. That is part of what made the tavern so central to medieval life. It gathered together people who otherwise remained scattered, on roads, in workshops, in fields, in kitchens, in markets, in small houses closing against the evening. For a few hours under smoke-darkened rafters, those people shared a world. Not equally, because rank still mattered. Not always peacefully, because drink, pride, and fatigue could sharpen tempers. Not cleanly, because the realities of medieval life clung to every bench, floorboard, and cloak. But they shared it nonetheless. The tavern gave them a common fire, common noise, common rumor, common caution, common weariness. And that shared life mattered. In the modern world, it is easy to underestimate what places like this provided. We are used to separating functions. One place for eating, another for sleeping, another for hearing news, another for doing business, another for amusement. But the medieval tavern often joined many of these together. It was part dining room, part drinking house, part inn, part social hall, part information exchange, part refuge from the road, part extension of the local economy. Under one roof, it answered needs that in later centuries would spread into different institutions. To visit such a place, then, was to step into more than hospitality. It was to step into a living network. Information moved there, money moved there, goods moved there, trust moved there, and suspicion too. Songs moved there, arguments moved there, weariness moved there most of all. A person entering the tavern did not merely seek refreshment. He or she entered a space where medieval society became briefly visible to itself. You could read so much in that room if you knew how to look. The merchant in better cloth, the laborer with tired hands, the traveler carrying the road in his boots and in his accent, the keeper watching everything, the serving woman threading her way between benches, the older regular who had heard every kind of story and still listened for new ones, the younger men too loud for their own good, the guest who counted his coins carefully before asking for food, the stranger whom everyone noticed at first and then accepted or did not. Each person brought a different claim on the tavern, and the tavern, in its rough and practical way, held them all together for an evening. And yet perhaps the most enduring thing about it was not the variety of people, or even the food and drink, but the balance it struck between harshness and comfort. That balance is what the modern imagination often misses. The tavern was not comfortable because it was luxurious. It was comfortable because the world outside could be so uncomfortable, because roads were long, because weather was hard, because homes could be cramped, because work was heavy, because darkness after sunset changed the character of the world. Against all that, a fire, a bench, a bowl, a cup, and the sound of other human beings nearby could mean a great deal. This is why the tavern should not be romanticized too lightly, but neither should it be stripped of its warmth in the name of realism. Its truth lies in the joining of those things. It was rough and meaningful, smoky and welcoming, public and intimate, ordinary and in its own way, deeply memorable. It was one of those places where daily life, for all its hardship, briefly arranged itself into something almost protective. If you had visited one at the end of a long medieval day, you would not have found perfection. You might have found poor ale, thin stew, a hard bench, a suspicious glance, too much smoke, a quarrel brewing nearby, a bed full of straw and fleas upstairs. You might also have found warmth reaching into numb hands, bread enough to ease hunger, a useful rumor about the road ahead, a place by the fire, a familiar voice, a song taken up by others, and the relief of not being alone after dark. The real experience was made from all of these things at once, and perhaps that is the final image worth carrying away, not a heroic one, not a cinematic one. Simply this: evening has settled over the town, the streets are dim, the sign hangs over the door. Inside, the fire is burning low, cups rest on scarred wood, voices have softened. Someone has nearly drifted to sleep by the hearth. Someone else is preparing to climb the stair. The keeper is still moving through the room, setting things in order for the night. Beyond the walls, the world remains uncertain, cold, and dark. But here, for a little while longer, there is light, heat, food, drink, memory, and human nearness. That was what it was like to visit a medieval tavern. It was louder than many would expect, and darker too. Dirtier, rougher, less private, and less romantic than legend. But it was also warmer, more social, more essential, and more human. It was a place where the Middle Ages stopped being an abstraction and became a room full of living people, each carrying hunger, fatigue, status, stories, and hope through the door. And when they stepped back out into the night, they carried a little of that room with them. The smoke in their clothes, the warmth in their hands, the taste of ale or broth, the murmur of conversation still lingering in the ear, the memory of firelight on old wood, the knowledge that somewhere in the dark town behind them, one doorway still opened onto company and shelter. That may be the most lasting truth of all. For all the centuries that separate us from the medieval world, we can still understand the pull of that doorway. We can still understand why a person, cold and tired at the end of the day, would follow the sound of voices and the glow of firelight and step inside,